Okay, welcome, Gail. Over to you.
Thanks, Kate. I'm trying to work out this whole chat box thing because um, I'd planned for this session to be quite interactive, and if I can't see the chat, it's going to be a bit of a problem. But Kate, I might need you then to help out. I'm having tech issues, everybody, so I'm really sorry about that.
Do you want me to do the slides and then you can access chat?
Uh, let's see how I go, and
Okay.
then if we need to swap, we can.
Okay.
Sound okay? Okay, so I'm really excited to be here, and I'm very sorry to have missed yesterday. Um, I'm sure I'll know lots of you who are here. I'm Gail, I lead the advocacy programme at the NDTI. You know, we don't deliver any advocacy, but we do care deeply about people having access to really amazing advocacy. And so we do all sorts of different bits and pieces trying to support advocacy best practice. And those are some of the bits that we do, QPM, a few different reports and reviews. And this week is Advocacy Awareness Week. So if you haven't already, have a look on your social media with the hashtags AAW24 and hashtag Advocacy Works. And there's some amazing content all about the impact of advocacy. Okay, that's the plug bit over. So this session is about safeguarding, and Kate, this came about because you and I have had loads of conversations, haven't we, about when does poor quality of care or a sort of low-ish concern or a bit of a niggle become a safeguarding issue. And so this session is very much exploring that, and will be pretty interactive if we can make the interactive bits work. So I guess my short answer to when does poor quality care become a safeguarding issue is we don't know. And I guess that's the issue. We don't know if poor quality care is going to become a safeguarding issue, which is why it's so important that we pay attention to anything that could become more significant. And I think it's often those little tiny things that worry us or that we notice that aren't a kind of big flashing safeguarding concern, but which can be indicative of something else going on, and definitely can be indicative of something else going on as when things build up over time. So just some reminders really for all of us that our beginnings as a profession, I think we're a profession, as a sector, came from us starting to exist. Advocacy existed in places where there were concerns about quality of care. There were concerns about equality of voices and equality of power, and where there could be potential abuse or neglect. So long stay hospitals for people with a learning disability, NHS campuses for people with a learning disability, and mental health settings for people with mental health problems. Those were our kind of roots back in the 80s of advocacy as we know it today. And I would say that advocacy has always been a safeguard. It's always been about safeguarding in a variety of different ways. And the fact that we were in those closed places, are in those closed places, are in those places where people might be at risk, means that we're a safeguard beyond our very important and primary role of making sure people have their voices heard, have their rights upheld, achieve equality, and social justice, and all those amazing things that advocacy is. But on top of that, we're there as a kind of, I think, as an extra pair of ears and eyes that support safeguarding. And we as a sector made a decision back in 2014 after the really horrendous things that happened to people at Winterbourne View to include safeguarding within our advocacy charter. And in recognition that advocacy organisations, individual advocates have a really vital role to play within safeguarding, and to I think kind of challenge us to push up the bar in terms of how we responded to concerns, how we responded to poor practice, how we responded to institutional and organisational abuse, and to try to ensure that as organisations we've got robust systems and processes in place in order to help us manage and respond to and monitor and check safeguarding concerns, and also to make sure that as individual advocates we've got the training and support we need to recognise where there's safeguarding concerns and be empowered to report and raise those concerns when they're happening. And so there are some little reminders here. So that was a shift in the charter, and it also made its way into QPM. So we've got this statement in the charter down here. I don't know if you can see my cursor squizzling around. So it says here, under our accountability section of the Advocacy Charter, the advocacy provider will address systemic issues in health and social care provision or other services. That's been there for 10 years in our charter as a kind of core function of advocacy provision. And then one of the standards around systemic advocacy is that common themes and issues affecting people using services are regularly addressed with commissioners and providers of health and social care services and or relevant others. So that might be the regulator. And we sometimes refer to this as systemic advocacy. So that might be where we don't have direct instruction. It might be where we've noticed some themes or trends happening. It might be where we've seen practice that we're really concerned about, and we need to do something about it as kind of responsible organisations and partners in the health and social care system. So I don't need to remind you of this, but often as advocates, we are the only people kind of outside of that paid support network. And so kind of maintaining our independence and maintaining a being, oh, will you believe that's my front door? Shall I just ignore it? Yeah, let's ignore it, see what happens. I think it's the postman.
Do you need to go?
Let's leave
If
it,
you
it'll be
need to
fine.
go, I can facilitate a few minutes.
All right, you go, and I'll be 2 seconds. I'm really sorry, that's ridiculous, isn't it?
Okay, that's fine. So let's think about what Gail was just putting to us, and maybe in the chat box, if you could share your experience of this, how kind of what are people's circles of support like? Do you feel that you are sometimes holding that responsibility to that you're the only person who has got the person's back? Not maybe that's not right, but you're the only person who has got the person's voice clearly. Do you feel that? Or do you feel actually that you are one of many people who are listening and that the person would be able to share concerns with? Let's hear from people in the chat. What's your experience like of this?
Sorry.
It's all right. I've just asked people around, do they feel that they're often the only person who is doing this with their partner? Or are they one of many who are listening? And I think the feedback. And when you're putting things in the chat box, guys, it's fine to send it to host and panel, but if you put it to everyone, that means that the whole group, of which I think we've got nearly 100 people today, can see. So there's a
I've got the
mixture.
chat.
You've got the chat now. Cool.
Well, I've just seen that someone's a
Cool.
biscuit wrapper. That's brilliant. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, so some people are feeling part of a team and sometimes feeling quite isolated that you're the only person who, yeah, and I think for some people they feel that their advocate is the only one who's listening, don't they? Okay, back to you, Gail. Thanks for that.
Okay.
Thanks,
Thank you.
guys.
Sorry, everyone, for the postman interruption. Okay. Yeah, so we're that role that's entirely individual and entirely aligned, independent and entirely aligned with the person. But we're also present. I kind of said it before, haven't I? We're in those settings where poor quality of care can really impact on people. Okay. And I just thought this was really helpful. One of the things that we're seeing increasingly, so when we're out and about talking to people doing QPM visits, obviously we talk about systemic advocacy and how do you keep track of concerns. We have those conversations all the time. And increasingly what we're hearing is, oh, our local authority have a section on their website where we go and raise a concern, and it's automatic, and it's kind of built into culture and practice in that way. And so this was just a screenshot of the Staffordshire and Stoke-on-Trent Adult Safeguarding Partnership Board, and there it is in a beautiful box, raising a quality concern. And I think that's just, I think it's great, because I think it's a recognition of the fact that sometimes a concern about quality of care becomes safeguarding. And the fact that it's owned by the Safeguarding Adults Board kind of is indicative of that, isn't it? So onward. So now we're here to chat. Now we're here for the interactive bit. So what I really want to hear from you all are your thoughts about why is it important for us as advocates to be alert to care quality issues? Why does it matter? Somebody's got their hand up. Don't know if I can do anything about that. If it affects everyone in the home, yeah. CQC years between inspections. Yeah, might see things other people don't. Identifying trends. Could be an organisational issue. It directly impacts the client. Because we visit less frequently, that those can become sensitised to the everyday.
Yeah.
Something that may start off as a small issue can grow over time. Exactly. It's like the canary in the coal mine. To safeguard people could become more serious. Minor concerns can escalate and be part of a bigger issue. Impact on family. Okay, I don't know whether, I don't know how to let somebody in if that's what they're wanting to do and ask or say something.
I've unmuted Susan if Susan, you wanted to take the mic.
Hi, can you hear me? All right, okay. I'm not very good with Zoom because we work mainly on Teams, so it's like an alien life form to me. I think, Gail, I think you already identified it. Sorry, I've had to join the meeting late because we just had an engineer out. But yeah, I think you identified it perfectly, which is that it impacts heavily on people's quality of life. I mean, I've worked in the care sector, so I am very conversant with care plans, and I do it as a matter of course. It's just a natural thing that I look at. But, you know, I'm aware not everybody that's worked in care does it, but it is very, very important. It impacts a lot on people's lives because that's where they're living.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Thanks very much, Susan. I really appreciate that. And I think somebody's just said safeguarding is everyone's business. And I mean, and that really sums it up, doesn't it? And I guess, so on to my next slide. Those on the ground can have a fear of internal repercussion. And I think sometimes talking to advocates, you know, advocates can have a fear of repercussion, and that's normal, isn't it? It takes bravery and courage to challenge systems, particularly broken systems, where we can see care staff with the very best of intentions, but things not being as they should be. And that takes bravery and courage, I think, to challenge those systems sometimes. Clients may not be aware of their rights and what they should expect, absolutely. And I guess, I mean, ultimately, because poor quality care leads to people dying, and it's just a terrible tragedy. And I wanted to share this story that I read recently. So this was an article published earlier in the month, in October, in Community Living magazine, written by George Julian, who I'm sure many of you will know, who started out by live tweeting inquests of the deaths of people with a learning disability who died in care. And she wrote about this gentleman, Marcus, who's recently had an inquest and who died within a care home, and in a care home where he had been supported for the majority of his adult life. Thank you, Kate, for posting that. So Marcus had a learning disability, and he had some particular care plans in place around eating and drinking, and because he was at risk of choking and at risk of aspiration. And one day, Marcus was taking part in a kind of sensory activity with the other people that he lived with. And the sensory activity involved a bowl of rice, dyed coloured rice, and inside were conkers, and the activity was to put your hands into the rice and find the conkers. And it was probably a fantastic activity. But Marcus was left on his own with this bowl of rice, and ate 2 conkers, and also inhaled some rice. So he died a couple of weeks later from aspirational pneumonia. He got a conker lodged in his esophagus, and it's a tragic story. And I guess there's something here, isn't there, about and it's something here about the fact that there was never any intention for any harm to come to Marcus during that activity. It was a well thought through sensory activity, and a moment of inattention led to Marcus's death, and his and the inquest concluded it was an avoidable death. And not all low-level care or poor quality care situations will result in somebody dying, but they can result in somebody dying. And certainly in my own advocacy practice, I know that I've been in situations where I've been raising a concern, and raising the same concern, and raising the same concern, and then somebody died, even though we've been raising this concern. And it's an awful thing to happen. But it's why it's so important for us to stay on top of those small things that might be happening, and to be really conversant, to have a really clear understanding about how people need to be supported. What are the different care plans that are in place in order for people to be supported appropriately? So do go and have a read of Marcus's story, and catch up with George Julian's blog. George is now going to be the inquest reporter for Community Living magazine. So another kind of reminder is that the Walton Hall SAR kind of talked about the fact that there was an illusion of advocacy. There were advocacy services going into Walton Hall, 2 advocacy services going into Walton Hall. And yet neither of those services had much of a presence, or had been able to develop relationships with people in those settings where they had felt able to talk about the concerns. And arguably there were failings within both of those advocacy services in terms of not providing cover to when there were periods of time with advocates being off. But this idea of an illusion of advocacy kind of is something that sits with me quite a lot. You know, what does that mean for us as a sector? Yeah, something to think about as we go through the rest. I can see there's a comment. I'm going to come back to Christine's comment in a bit. So I'm going to spend some time together now thinking about what are the kinds of examples of poor practice or those low-level concerns that you come across in your day-to-day work that might not be considered safeguarding and on the surface. So it would be just great to get a few ideas in the chat, so we've got some things to talk about together. And Christine, I'm going to read your comment now. Does that make sense? So things that you've seen when you're visiting people, could be their own home that they have support coming into, could be a care home, could be supported living, might be a hospital setting, might be a mental health setting. What are some examples of poor practice that you see? Staff sitting around on mobile phones ignoring clients. Out-of-date care plans, staff shortages. Yeah. Unsafe ratios. Yeah. Blanket restrictions. Yes, Emma. Where do you want him? Speaking to adults like their children when a care home is meant to be like their own home. Yeah. Not having the privacy to talk with me. Staff ignoring residents. lack of staff on the floor, leftover food left on the side. Oh, yes, Claire, unopened yogurt there for 3 days. Lack of hoists for the number of people that need them, not being invited to meetings. Yeah. Anticipate need, no communication, medication handover rigidly in-house, not while out and about. Lack of NCAs and care recordings. Okay, loads of ideas, staff attitude, financial abuse, gender discrimination. So lots of these probably are safeguarding concerns, aren't they? Immediately safeguarding concerns. And they're concerns that we probably should be responding to as safeguarding concerns. Gender discrimination is really interesting. We've had some conversations about when does discrimination become a safeguarding concern? Well, actually, the Care Act tells us it is a safeguarding concern. Discriminatory practice, discriminatory abuse is a safeguarding concern under the Care Act. Defensive carers, lack of activities and interactions, set bedtimes, yeah, brilliant. Set meal and bedtime. Had a client who desperately needed to see an optician. This was delayed for about 1 year, and as a result, he lost the sight of one eye. Oh, goodness, Elizabeth. Yeah, a different outcome. Unstable relationships not being monitored. And so I guess there's something for me then about all of those things. Oh, hang on, there's 25 more. Inaccurate daily logs, misuse of NCA, long wait times. Okay, lack of dentists. Yeah, they're all really, really important and absolutely examples of poor practice. I would say many of them are examples of safeguarding concerns that we should be responding to immediately as safeguarding concerns. And others of them aren't they? They're things that probably you contact the local authority and they're going to say that's not a safeguarding concern, but they're things that we need to, as individual advocates and within organisations, be alert to, be recording, keeping track of, communicating with our colleagues about. I think kind of some of those things like the staffing issues, I think is a really important one. And particularly when there's high levels of agency staff, if people aren't aware of risk assessments, aren't aware of those things, those are issues that we need to kind of respond to straight away, aren't they? So there might all be issues that we need to respond to, but some of them will be safeguarding and some of them won't be immediately safeguarding, but they're all issues that we need to kind of keep track of and be alert to. Yeah. Okay. So I just wanted to kind of reference our legislation around safeguarding, and just as a reminder, so in both the Care Act legislation in England, which is where our safeguarding legislation sits, and the Social Services and Wellbeing Act Wales, where it sits in Wales, both talk about prevention and both talk about well-being. And I think those are really important points to remember when we're thinking about when poor quality care becomes a safeguarding concern, because the very pieces of legislation themselves say they're kind of recognising actually poor quality care may be indicative of a safeguarding concern, and we need to take preventative approaches, which means we need to be really proactive when these kinds of concerns are coming up and making sure we're responding to them robustly. So this is all from the Care and Support Statutory Guidance, so the guidance that sits alongside the Care Act. Improving life, stop abuse or neglect, prevent harm. You know, those are all kind of really proactive and kind of actions that happen in the future. They're all about making sure we try to prevent. And here it is. I didn't take all 6 principles, but there it is. It's better to take action before harm occurs. It's there in the statutory guidance. And the Care Act lists these types of abuse. And I know we'll all have done our safeguarding training. And I'm going to, Susan, there's a really good point. I'll come back to you. We'll all have done our safeguarding training. And I think it's just a reminder that the different types of abuse kind of tell us what is abuse, what's neglect. There are some amazing detailed information in the statutory guidance for the Care Act in England and on Sky's website as well. So for those colleagues in Wales, protecting those at risk of harm, prevent abuse, protect people's health, well-being. Okay, so it's still this kind of early intervention, prevention stuff. And some slightly different definitions in Wales around what abuse and neglect is. But neglect, a failure to meet a person's basic physical, emotional, social, psychological needs. And all of those examples that you've shared during this chat kind of fall into our safeguarding frameworks, don't they? Okay, so Susan says, where do you go when the safeguarding isn't robust? And I hear it all the time from advocates. We've raised the concern and the local authority have said it doesn't meet the threshold. We've raised the concern and the local authority have sent it back to the ward. We've raised the concern and nobody's doing anything about it. And I think the answer from me is you keep going. You keep going and you keep escalating. DQC have an increasing role in the oversight of local authority provision, including safeguarding. They're just beginning their inspection processes with local authorities, but also have that responsibility with registered settings. So I wanted to carry on and get your thoughts about what kinds of things, so going back to your examples from earlier, which of those kinds of examples that you've thought about are examples that you might just report to the setting, to the care home, to the ward manager, to the senior nurse on shift, to the supported living manager? What are your thoughts? Well, and this isn't a trick question. Report all concerns. Drinks out of reach, old yogurt. Yeah, absolutely. So I think what I'm going to hear from you is any concerns where reporting it to the setting there and then could make a difference and keep someone safe and change the outcome immediately, then you're going to, aren't you? You're going to let the setting know. To your manager, is there anything different that you'd report to your manager? Safeguarding concerns. So I guess all of these to the local authority, to DQC. I guess it's every single time it's going to be slightly different, isn't it? And which is another reason why we need to be constantly reflecting and reviewing our practice. If at imminent risk of significant harm, where the harm is actual or potentially significant. Yeah. So I think CQC say really clearly, let us know when there are things going wrong in registered settings. I would say build up those relationships with your local authority safeguarding teams where you can be reporting all of these low-level concerns. And of course, we need to be making sure our manager knows where there are things happening. Okay. And are there times when we might not report? Susan's saying sometimes it's not appropriate to report to the setting. Susan, do you want to say anything more about that? Amanda, our local authority are not wanting advocates on the safeguarding board. Okay. Concerns about closed cultures and bullying. Okay, so I think there might be some really rare exceptions where you don't report to the setting. And I know some mental health trusts or mental health providers kind of really want the advocacy organisations to be reporting directly to them. And most of the time that's right and appropriate, but there may be times where we need to think about, actually, if I report this now, does this put this person or people in this setting more at risk? If I report this directly to the setting, do I put people, will people be more at risk? Do I need to make sure I'm raising this externally in order that an appropriate response can be taken? I can see loads of questions about what to do when things aren't going right within our local authorities. I'm going to come back to them in a minute. Okay, well, let's address some of those now. And maybe we can support each other in some of them. If nothing comes from my discussion with the manager of the setting yet, then escalate. Is it an imminent risk of harm? If the LA does not accept a safeguarding, should we go to CQC? I guess that's a really interesting question, and the answer is why not? Why wouldn't you? And I think I would also continue to escalate within the local authority if at all possible. And the more evidence-based you can be when you're raising those safeguarding concerns, the clearer you can be about the potential risk to an individual or people within a setting, the more likely the local authority are going to respond appropriately. Local authority not wanting advocates on the Safeguarding Adult Board. We've done it, there's a few different documents out there. So that involve the role of advocacy in making safeguarding personal, which was published back in 2020, recommends that it's best practice to invite advocates onto the Safeguarding Board. It isn't built into the legislation, so we couldn't require it, but it is really helpful. So maybe remind people of that guidance. It's also in the NICE guidance, I think. Breaching, Matthew, do you want to say some more about that? Breaching client confidentiality without significant reasons. Oh, when you wouldn't report. Okay, well, come back to that in a second. A staff member stopped me to tell me something which she was worried to report to the setting. Yep. Lindsay, your report may form part of a much bigger picture and be the concern that tips a situation to a full investigation of the start of sanctions. Absolutely. I was talking to somebody the other day, and just in the course of the conversation, it became evident that they were describing a safeguarding situation, and they said, oh, but it's been going on for 3 months and nobody's, there's loads and loads of professionals involved. And anyway, even if I raise it, the situation wouldn't change. And I was like, is that a reason not to raise it? It's not your responsibility to come up with the solutions. And absolutely, your report may form part of a much bigger picture, which is why keeping track of these practice concerns is so important, and reporting them. Local authority would only accept concerns about my client, not other residents. Well, that's just ridiculous, isn't it, Sandra? They've got a responsibility to respond to anybody who raises any concerns about anybody. So yeah, that's they're totally in breach of the care and support statutory guidance in that situation. So I would say escalate, 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 and don't let it go. Don't let things drop. It requires that kind of tenacity and bravery and courage to kind of believe when you're raising something for the right reason. Local authorities are often protected of settings and agencies. Yeah. Consistently challenge decisions made where the person was not consulted or voice heard. I explain this as a safeguarding issue quoting. Which category, so the manager can look it up and think about it, then escalate if necessary. Thanks, Kate. Always report general concerns to local authority quality team. Yeah, that's brilliant, Susan. That's great to hear. So other things you can do as an organisation in terms of how you manage your practice around this stuff. How do you keep on top of concerns within your teams? What are the things that you do? What do you do when you get knocked back and knocked back and knocked back? Mandatory regular training and refreshers, clear procedures. Brilliant, Heather, thank you. Manager on local safeguarding board, yeah. Trends log in our team. Oh, that's brilliant, yeah. Best practice discussion. Effective escalation process and managers who will support. So important, isn't it, that we have the support and of our managers when we're raising concerns. Check with other advocates, share concerns in team meetings, recording all the concerns on the database, absolutely. Record, 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 report, report, report. Okay. Any other thoughts or ideas to share with each other about how you keep on top of this stuff? So, oh, there's more. Organisation have a safeguarding lead we can go to, raise with commissioners, legislative groups, yes. Speak to the manager of the social care team, yes. Raise concerns to commissioners, yes. Brilliant, great ideas. So here are just some kind of thoughts that have come out of conversations with organisations over the recent months when thinking about this stuff. Could look at a complaint, yeah, Carl. Report to brokerage. Been asked to do that before, okay. So yeah, some director of social care. I mean, absolutely, and I think when I'm saying escalate, is just escalate until you get someone to listen, where you're sure there's an issue. Thinking about the way that you're communicating those concerns might help you get a response, but you know, escalate. So kind of reflecting on standards of care, reflecting on rights and restrictions. And I don't know anybody at the conference yesterday and got to hear Jackie Jobson. I permanently have Jackie sitting on my shoulder, kind of talking about us not being complicit in a broken system. Did she say that yesterday? And being mindful of what an acceptable standard of care is. Get to know what does person-centered, strength-based care look like, sound like, and kind of identify and talk about the good practice so that we normalize best practice and kind of raise our expectations about how people should be being supported and cared for. Share information with each other, that's what you've been talking about. Talk about it. I know sometimes organisations will have like one advocate going into a care home, and you've got to manage the logistics of your RPRs and all of the rest of that. But I think sometimes if you've got more than one person going into one setting, it can be really helpful, can't it? Because you've got more than one person kind of gathering that intelligence about how something is. And I guess kind of recognising, oh, we've got some worries about Cedar Lodge or some worries about whatever the place is called. That might be a time to think, okay, let's see if we can have two advocates going in so that we've got a greater level of presence. Make sure you're kind of creating time in your team meetings, in reflective practice and in supervision to be reflecting on this stuff. It has a massive impact, doesn't we? You know, we were talking earlier about people's day-to-day quality of life, but beyond that, it can have a much more significant issue. I was thinking about you're going to visit someone and them having their breakfast or their lunch on their clothes still, or maybe on their face, and what that might be indicative of. And it could be indicative of all sorts of things which might be really innocuous, but which might be really serious. They might have vomited their food back up. They might have been choking whilst they were being supported to eat their meal. The person supporting them to eat might have not been doing a very good job. So there might be a risk of malnutrition because actually there's more food on the outside of them than on the inside of them. It might be indicative of inappropriate staffing ratios because actually it's two hours after lunch now and somebody's still got food on their clothes. There's that three-day-old yogurt, you know, the risk of food poisoning. So it's that conversations all the time about what's okay, but what might be those things that we can see, hear, smell, what might they be indicative of? That kind of professional curiosity, kind of start reflecting and asking questions about it. So recording information, somebody said they've got a trends log. And I would say if you haven't already got a trends log or a concerns log, or you're not already in the practice of reporting every single concern to the local authority, then start doing that. Get yourself a spreadsheet, get yourself a whatever it is in your team, and find some ways of tracking and recording those concerns so that you start to have some really concrete evidence of the concerns that you want to be taken seriously. On Tuesday the 5th, on Wednesday the 6th, on Monday the 12th, this happened, this happened, this happened when we were in this setting. So some really clear evidence can be really, really helpful in getting those concerns taken seriously. And of course, if you're recording that information, you need to be analysing it. You need some processes in place for spotting when themes and trends start to become a bigger something to be worried about. You need to be able to spot when trends are emerging and not just one-off little niggles. Sharing information externally. So we've been talking already about that, haven't we? So raising concerns, escalating them when we need to, and thinking about systemic advocacy. So we've got that responsibility to be raising issues even when we're not instructed to do so, where others might be at risk. I'm just going to jump through a slide or two and see if I can find it. Here we go. So that's the why do we need to share. And this is from the Sky guidance about when we should share without the consent of the individual. And somebody spoke about that earlier in the chat. And I think this is really, really helpful tool for us to reflect about when we should share information without somebody's consent or without instruction. So of course, in non-instructed advocacy, we don't have those same restrictions that we might have in instructed advocacy, wanting to respect and maintain that confidential relationship with somebody. But I think this guidance is really helpful. Particularly the bits about, are other people at risk? Are staff implicated? Sharing the information could prevent a crime or could prevent further safeguarding concerns. The risk is unreasonably high and meets criteria for multi-agency risk assessment. So there are some really helpful points of reference there for us in terms of when do we need to be raising concerns without consent. And of course, it's there in our charter as a sector. We have said we believe it's what we should be doing. Okay. So recording your concerns, analysing information, keeping reflective, staying curious. Just talk about supervision, saying again, talk about it in supervision. Find ways to make sure that you're all able to keep fresh eyes, to not get sensitized to the fact that this particular place smells really bad, or the food looks terrible, or you know, this is the third time in 3 weeks that you've arrived to see somebody and 2 people are sitting in wet clothes. You know, keep fresh eyes, keep alert to the poor quality. Cover gaps in service. So that's back to Walton Hall. Walton Hall, one of the main recommendations was, you know, if you've got somebody off on long-term sick, make sure you've got cover going into settings. Elizabeth, so that's back to that guidance from Sky. So if a client is expressly wishing for an issue not to be raised, then is it important to comply with their wish? I would say mostly if there is a risk of harm and the person is experiencing abuse or neglect, it's important that we raise it. So this guidance from Sky can be a really helpful barometer. But I think when we're talking to people, when we first start our relationships with them, we need to be clear. If you let me know something and I'm worried that you're at risk of being hurt or somebody else is, I'm going to have to break that confidentiality. And I think most people respect that. In my experience as an advocate, people have respected that. And they've also, at the point somebody's disclosed something to me, usually it's because they want some help, even if, or they want something to be done about it. And they've understood when I've said, I can't not say. So I think it's something you've got to keep talking about in a team. It's not you on your own making that decision. And I think it's a really close judgment call. I'd be concerned if we weren't raising concerns. Okay. Link with your local safeguarding teams. If you don't already have those relationships where you can pick up the phone and check things out with them, see if you can build that relationship. Get into their team meetings. You get them to your team meeting. Find out if the quality teams locally have got a concerns log, a concerns form like the one that I was showing you earlier. Find out who your inspectors are locally. Build that relationship with CQC if you can. Somebody said it earlier in the chat, keep your safeguarding training updated, and then maybe a little bit more distant. I don't know, that's not the right word, but think about the culture within your organisations. Can you have these conversations about, do we share this concern when the person doesn't want to, or I'm really worried that we haven't done more? Have you got that culture within your organisations? It's safe and open and reflective. What can you do to change that if it isn't? And I guess last but not least, don't ignore your gut. If it doesn't feel right, it probably isn't right. And sometimes that's really difficult, isn't it? It's like, I haven't got anything concrete, but there is something not right. And that's when we need to think as organisations, okay, what do we do about that? How can we investigate that? And of course, not investigate entirely the wrong word, isn't it? You're not investigating safeguarding concerns, but how do we start to build up some evidence, if it's there, of our concerns? And if there isn't any evidence, we still need to be kind of responding to those feelings that we have when things aren't right. And I think those things are saying the same. There's something, isn't there, about how the organisations around us support advocacy as well and respond to us as advocates. And I guess I want to just reference that because we know it's really difficult. We know that Safeguarding Adults boards say, no, thanks, we don't really want the advocacy organisation involved. And we know that concerns get knocked back. And there's more to be done, isn't there, all the time? It's why we do Advocacy Awareness Week every year, to continue to educate and ensure that teams around people fully understand advocacy and people's rights around advocacy and their rights to be safe from harm. That's a nice guidance I referenced. And I think that's me, and some time for questions, if there are any.
Thanks, Gail, as always. Over to you guys. Anybody like to ask Gail a question? If you want to come on the mic or come up on screen, that's fine. Just raise your hand and then I can work our magic. Or you can pop it in the Q&A or the chat box. Okay, right. Bum, bum. Okay, Lee, did you want to ask the question?
Hello, it was a really, really interesting talk. Thank you very much for that. I really appreciated it. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yep.
thanks, Lee.
I raise quite a lot of safeguardings. Just for clarity, I'm an IMHA. So I work in hospital settings and in the community also, but predominantly hospital settings. The issue is that I really struggle with is one, the safeguarding threshold itself. In the sense, is it a threat? Is it a safeguarding? Is it not a safeguarding? For example, something like hoarding, for example, where